Nothing exposes fake power faster than paperwork. The first thing I saw that morning was sunlight flashing off two sheriff department SUVs parked sideways across the marina entrance while my coffee was still too hot to drink. The smell of lake water and fresh asphalt drifted through the open truck window as I slowed near the gate and watched a security guard point directly at me like he had been waiting all morning for this exact moment. Heat waves already shimmered above the pavement even though it was barely 8 o'clock in the Arizona morning. Palm trees lining the entrance moved slowly in dry wind, while wealthy retirees stood on their balconies, watching the scene unfold like neighborhood entertainment. One deputy rested his hand casually against his belt, while the other studied a clipboard handed over by a woman standing near the gate in a white pantsuit and oversized sunglasses. Deborah Sinclair, HOA president, queen of the entire neighborhood according to every resident I had met during my first week living there. She spotted my truck immediately and smiled the same way people smile before serving lawsuits. Cold, controlled, polite enough to look respectable from a distance. I parked beside the marina gate and stepped out into air already hot enough to sting my lungs. Gravel crunched under my boots while cicadas buzzed from decorative shrubs around the entrance sign. Lake Avalon Estates. Luxury waterfront living. The giant stone sign sat directly beside a marina dock my attorney technically owned as of 72 hours earlier. Nobody there seemed to understand that yet. The deputy approached first. Mid-40s. Sunburned neck. Tired eyes. He looked more annoyed than aggressive. "Morning, sir," he said. "We received a trespassing complaint regarding unauthorized access attempts into private HOA property." I looked past him toward Deborah standing beside the security booth holding a folder against her chest like she was preparing for court. She had probably practiced this little performance in the mirror. "Trespassing," I repeated calmly. "That is interesting." Deborah stepped forward before the deputy could answer. Her perfume mixed with sunscreen and dry desert air while she adjusted her sunglasses carefully. "This man has repeatedly refused to comply with HOA access policies," she announced loudly enough for nearby residents to hear from their balconies. "He claims ownership rights over community property despite not being part of this association." Claims ownership rights. That wording almost made me laugh. I looked around slowly at the expensive boats tied to the marina docks. Perfectly painted walkways. Decorative fountains spraying beside the clubhouse patio. The entire luxury waterfront community glittered under Arizona sunlight like a resort advertisement. And technically, half the commercial property sitting underneath all of it now belonged to me. My name is Lucas Bennett. I am 41 years old, and 3 weeks before that morning I had no intention of becoming anyone's landlord. I spent most of my adult life working commercial construction contracts across Colorado and Nevada building shopping centers, storage facilities, and highway service stations. Long days, concrete dust, steel framing, burnt coffee inside job trailers before sunrise. Then my marriage collapsed after 15 years together, and suddenly every city I worked in started feeling loud in a way I could not explain. Too much traffic. Too many people pretending to be happy. When I found the old lakeside cabin listed through an estate liquidation outside Phoenix, it felt quiet enough to breathe again. That was all I wanted. Quiet. The cabin itself sat outside official HOA boundaries beside the older marina section originally built before the luxury subdivision expanded around it. Weathered cedar siding, small boat dock, rusted mailbox leaning slightly sideways near the gravel road. Most people driving through Lake Avalon probably assumed the place belonged to some retired fisherman who refused to sell out to developers. Fine by me. I liked that nobody paid attention to it. At least until Deborah Sinclair decided I was a problem. The deputy shifted awkwardly while glancing between both of us. "Sir," he said carefully, "the HOA provided documentation showing this marina and gate access area fall under private community control." Deborah smiled immediately after hearing that sentence like she had already won. Residents watching from balconies started whispering among themselves while somebody slowly drove a golf cart closer to listen. Morning sunlight reflected sharply off polished boats tied along the dock behind us. I reached into my truck calmly and grabbed a thick brown envelope from the passenger seat. The paper inside still smelled fresh from county records. "That is where things get complicated," I said quietly. Deborah folded her arms. "There is nothing complicated about trespassing law. The confidence in her voice told me she genuinely believed that. People like Deborah always confuse authority with ownership because nobody around them ever forces them to learn the difference. I opened the envelope slowly while hot wind pushed dust across the parking lot around our feet. The deputy looked exhausted already, probably regretting the entire call. 3 days ago, I said evenly, I finalized an estate acquisition involving the original Avalon Marina commercial parcel. Deborah's expression did not change yet. She still thought this was bluffing. I handed the deputy the certified ownership transfer packet directly from county records. He skimmed the first page casually at first. Then his posture changed. He looked down again slower this time, while the marina fountain splashed softly behind us. Deborah noticed immediately. "What exactly is that?" she demanded sharply. The deputy cleared his throat awkwardly before answering. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "according to this filing, Mr. Bennett now owns the commercial land lease beneath the marina operations, clubhouse parking section, and gate access corridor." Silence hit the entrance hard enough to feel physical. Even the residents watching from balconies stopped talking. Deborah stared at the paperwork in disbelief while dry Arizona whined rattled palm leaves overhead. Then she laughed once. Short, nervous. "That is impossible," she snapped. I looked past her toward the security gate she spent all week using to block my truck from entering the marina. "Funny thing about ownership," I said quietly. "It usually does not care what the HOA believes." The deputies left 10 minutes later looking embarrassed for even being there in the first place. Deborah stayed near the marina entrance, clutching her folder so tightly the edges bent under her fingers while residents whispered around her like wind moving through dry grass. I remember the exact smell of the lake that morning. Warm water, boat fuel, sunscreen drifting off the clubhouse patio where retirees usually drank coffee pretending they lived inside a resort commercial. Except nobody looked relaxed anymore. The security guard who spent 3 straight days blocking my truck from entering the marina suddenly could not look me in the eye. Funny how fast authority disappears once paperwork enters the conversation. I drove back toward my cabin slowly with the windows down, letting hot Arizona air roll through the truck, while the marina disappeared behind rows of expensive homes and perfectly trimmed palm trees. Lake Avalon Estates looked beautiful from a distance. Artificially beautiful. Every mailbox painted the same color. Every lawn measured down to exact HOA specifications. Every house carrying the same polished luxury vibe designed to convince people they bought more than property. They bought status. That was Deborah Sinclair's real business model. Not neighborhoods. Identity. The cabin sat on the far eastern edge of the lake where the older marina structures still remained from before developers transformed the area into a gated waterfront community. My place looked nothing like the surrounding houses. Weathered cedar siding faded by desert sun. Metal roof patched twice over the years. Old fishing rods leaning beside the porch. The dock behind the cabin creaked whenever wind pushed against it hard enough. Most HOA residents treated the place like an eyesore they wished would disappear, which honestly made me like it even more. I bought the property 6 weeks earlier through a quiet estate auction after the previous owner passed away with no surviving family. Small listing, barely advertised. Most buyers ignored it because the cabin itself needed work and technically fell outside the official HOA residential map. What caught my attention was the marina parcel buried underneath the property records. Commercial easement rights, dock access ownership, gate corridor agreements tied to the older section of Lake Avalon before expansion projects swallowed the surrounding land decades ago. Most people skim property documents looking for square footage and tax rates. Years working construction contracts taught me to read every line nobody else notices. That habit changed my life. The divorce probably helped too, if I am being honest. Losing 15 years of marriage forces you to notice details differently afterward. I spent nearly 2 decades building shopping centers and commercial properties across the Southwest, while my ex-wife handled most of life back home. Then somewhere between endless work trips and hotel rooms smelling like industrial carpet cleaner, we stopped being partners and started feeling like co-workers sharing bills. By the time everything officially ended, cities felt exhausting to me. Too much traffic, too much noise, too many people pretending expensive things fixed loneliness. So when I found that old cabin beside Lake Avalon, I wanted silence more than comfort. silence, and maybe enough space to remember who I was before life turned into schedules and concrete contracts. The first week there felt peaceful. Mornings smelled like lake water and cedar trees warming under the sun. I spent hours repairing loose boards on the dock while pelicans skimmed across the water nearby. At night, crickets filled the desert air so loudly it almost sounded electric. Then Deborah Sinclair noticed me. The first violation appeared taped to my mailbox 4 days after moving in. Improper exterior maintenance. Apparently, my fishing boat trailer violated community aesthetic standards despite sitting entirely outside HOA residential boundaries. I ignored it at first because legally the HOA had no authority over my parcel. Then came the second notice. Unauthorized dock usage. Followed by another claiming my cabin mailbox did not match approved neighborhood color guidelines. Color guidelines. For a cabin older than the entire subdivision. I still remember laughing out loud reading that one while standing, barefoot on the porch holding coffee that smelled burnt because I forgot it brewing too long. Deborah escalated quickly after realizing I was not responding. Security patrols started parking near the marina whenever I launched my boat. Residents suddenly stared openly anytime I drove through the gate corridor connecting the cabin road to the marina access lane. Somebody even placed a temporary sign near the dock reading private HOA waterfront access only. The sign sat directly on property technically tied to my commercial easement rights. That was the moment I stopped viewing Deborah as annoying and started viewing her as dangerous. Because people willing to fake authority over property lines usually assume nobody will challenge them legally. One evening about 2 weeks before the deputies showed up, I walked into the Clubhouse restaurant for dinner after spending all day repairing dock planks under 106-degree heat. The place smelled like grilled salmon, lemon cleaner, and expensive perfume drifting through chilled air conditioning. Residents sat around polished tables discussing golf tournaments and real estate values, while soft jazz played overhead. Deborah spotted me immediately from across the dining room. She crossed the floor smiling politely enough to fool anyone who did not pay attention to her eyes. Residents only after 6 o'clock, she informed me loudly beside the hostess stand. Half the restaurant went silent. I remember setting my truck keys on the counter carefully while every conversation nearby slowed to a stop. Interesting policy, I said calmly. Especially considering your marina and parking structures operate under land rights attached to my acquisition parcel. Her smile twitched for maybe half a second before returning. You seem confused about how ownership works here. Looking back now, that sentence explains Deborah Sinclair perfectly. She genuinely believed visibility created authority. If she controlled the gates, the meetings, the clubhouse, and the rules, then ownership itself became whatever she said it was. The problem for Deborah was simple. County records do not care about confidence. And buried underneath all the luxury branding, private security, and fake suburban royalty was one ugly truth nobody inside Lake Avalon Estates bothered reading until it was too late. Deborah Sinclair treated Lake Avalon Estates like a private kingdom disguised as a neighborhood. The more time I spent around the community, the clearer that became. Every morning around 7:30, her white Range Rover rolled slowly through the subdivision, while landscapers straightened posture the second they saw it coming. Security guards opened gates before she even reached them. Residents waved nervously like employees greeting upper management instead of neighbors acknowledging an HOA president. She carried that same leather folder everywhere too, tucked against perfectly pressed blazers like some kind of suburban sheriff badge. The woman lived for authority. I started noticing the smaller things after that. The way residents lowered their voices when mentioning her name near the clubhouse. The way contractors immediately blamed board policy anytime someone questioned fees or restrictions. One older guy at the marina quietly told me Deborah once fined a retired couple because their patio furniture cushions were visually inconsistent with waterfront standards. Waterfront standards. Everything in Lake Avalon revolved around appearances. Expensive appearances. Artificial perfection polished so aggressively it stopped feeling human. The strangest part was how much people tolerated simply because Deborah acted confident enough to make rules sound official. A week after the deputies showed up at the marina, I stopped by the community cafe near the golf course entrance to grab breakfast before heading out on the lake. The place smelled like dark roast coffee, cinnamon pastries, and chlorine drifting over from the resort-style pool outside. Ceiling fans pushed cool air through the dining room while retirees sat discussing stock prices and property values beneath framed photographs of fake Arizona sunsets hanging on the walls. I noticed conversations slowing the second I walked in. Not openly hostile, just cautious, curious. The marina incident spread through the subdivision fast. People were trying to figure out whether I was crazy, dangerous, or telling the truth. I grabbed coffee and sat near the window overlooking the lake. 10 minutes later, Deborah walked in wearing white tennis clothes and oversized sunglasses even though she was indoors. She spotted me immediately. Of course she did. Everything inside that neighborhood operated like a surveillance system built around her ego. She crossed the cafe smiling politely enough for everyone nearby to think we were friendly acquaintances. "Lucas," she said brightly, "I hear there was some confusion with county paperwork this week." Confusion. Interesting word choice considering she called law enforcement over ownership records. I looked out toward the marina where sunlight reflected sharply off expensive boats tied to docks technically connected to my parcel rights. County records seemed pretty clear to the deputies. I replied calmly. A few people nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Deborah pulled out the chair across from me without asking and sat down carefully. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with coffee and lake air drifting through the open patio doors. "You need to understand something about communities like this," she said quietly. "People here invested their savings into stability, predictability. They do not respond well to disruptions." There it was again. The same language every fake authority figure eventually uses. Stability, community, standards. Words designed to make control sound noble. I took another sip of coffee and watched golfers moving slowly across the course beyond the lake. "Interesting," I said. "Because your version of stability involved calling deputies over land you do not actually own." Her jaw tightened slightly beneath that perfect smile. Tiny crack, barely visible. "The marina and clubhouse have operated under association oversight for over 20 years, she replied carefully. "Functional ownership matters more than technical filings." Functional ownership. I almost laughed out loud hearing that. Deborah genuinely believed long enough control transformed into legal reality. That might be the most HOA sentence I have ever heard. I told her. The couple sitting behind me actually snorted, trying not to laugh. Deborah ignored them. "You could make this easier on yourself," she said softly. "Communities have ways of isolating difficult people." There it was. The real Deborah finally showing through the polished suburban act. Not direct threats. Social pressure. Embarrassment. Isolation. She weaponized neighborhood culture because most residents feared becoming targets themselves. I leaned back in the chair studying her for a second while sunlight reflected across the lake outside. "You know what fascinates me?" I asked quietly. "You never once asked how much of this property transfer I actually own." Her expression froze for half a heartbeat before recovering. That reaction told me something important. Deborah already suspected the situation was worse than residents understood. Before she could answer, the cafe manager approached nervously carrying a clipboard. "Mrs. Sinclair," he said carefully, "the marina fuel vendor is asking about updated lease authorization signatures." Deborah looked irritated instantly. "Tell them operations continue as normal." The manager hesitated awkwardly. "They said the county ownership packet lists new landlord oversight requirements." Silence settled across the table. Even the golfers outside suddenly seemed far away beneath the sound of ceiling fans humming overhead. Deborah dismissed the manager sharply without looking at him, but I saw something shift behind her eyes right then. Not anger. Calculation. She was finally starting to understand this situation reached further than one stubborn cabin owner refusing HOA dues. The commercial vendors were noticing. The marina staff were noticing. Soon, every contractor tied to Lake Avalon Estates would start asking the same question. Who actually controlled the property underneath the community businesses? Deborah stood slowly and adjusted her sunglasses again, even though we were still indoors. "You are creating unnecessary complications," she said coldly. "No," I answered calmly. "I am uncovering them." She stared at me for another second before walking out across the patio toward the clubhouse, where two security guards immediately fell into step behind her like bodyguards protecting a politician. I watched residents quietly track her movement through the windows, while whispers spread table to table behind me. Then I looked back toward the marina shimmering beneath bright Arizona sunlight, and realized something that made the entire neighborhood suddenly feel very different. Deborah Sinclair was not trying to protect Lake Avalon Estates anymore. She was trying to protect whatever secrets sat underneath it. After the cafe conversation, Deborah stopped pretending the conflict was about HOA dues. That mask disappeared fast. The very next morning, I woke up to the sound of diesel engines idling outside the cabin just after sunrise. I stepped onto the porch holding black coffee while dry desert air rolled off the lake, carrying the smell of hot asphalt and boat fuel from the marina below. 2 landscaping trucks sat beside the gravel road near my mailbox while 3 workers in bright HOA maintenance shirts measured sections of the property line with orange spray paint and clipboards. One guy actually hammered a temporary stake directly beside my dock ramp, like he was marking construction zones. I walked down the porch steps slowly while gravel crunched under my boots. "Morning," I called out. "Somebody planning to explain why you are surveying my property?" The workers froze immediately. One younger guy glanced nervously toward the road before answering. "We were told this section falls under upcoming HOA beautification improvements." Beautification improvements. Another Deborah Sinclair phrase designed to make property interference sound friendly. I looked toward the marina where the white HOA utility cart sat parked beneath a palm tree. Deborah herself was not there, but she did not need to be. Her entire management style depended on other people carrying out uncomfortable tasks while she stayed polished and clean behind the scenes. I told the workers to remove the stakes and leave the property immediately. To their credit, they actually looked relieved. One older worker quietly apologized before loading the equipment back into the truck. As they drove away, I noticed something else near the dock. Entrance. New signs. Private HOA marina access. Unauthorized use subject to removal. The sign stood directly on land tied to my commercial parcel rights. Deborah was escalating now. Publicly. I spent the next few hours reviewing county easement maps spread across the kitchen table while ceiling fans pushed warm air through the cabin. The place smelled like cedar wood, lake water drifting through the screen windows, and old paper baking under desert heat. Every document pointed toward the same ugly reality. The marina access roads, clubhouse parking areas, gate corridors, and fuel dock operations all sat on overlapping lease agreements nobody inside the HOA bothered reviewing for years. The deeper I dug, the stranger the structure looked. Temporary vendor contracts, shell maintenance companies, security agreements routed through separate holding groups instead of direct HOA ownership. Deborah was hiding something inside those commercial layers. Around noon, my phone rang from an unknown number. "Mr. Bennett," a nervous male voice asked. "This is Eric from Avalon Marina Fuel Services." I leaned back in the kitchen chair while staring toward the lake through dusty cabin windows. "What can I do for you, Eric?" The guy hesitated for a second. "The HOA office told us to ignore the county transfer packet regarding landlord authorization updates. But our insurance company says we need verification immediately." There it was again. Vendors were panicking now too. "Send me copies of your current marina lease agreements," I said calmly. "I will review them." Another long pause. Then he lowered his voice almost to a whisper. "Off the record, Deborah told everyone you were trying to illegally seize HOA property." I actually laughed hearing that. Seize property. From the woman who spent 2 weeks pretending ownership records did not exist. By late afternoon, things got worse. I drove toward the marina to check the dock fuel station and found the main security gate locked shut with fresh chains wrapped around the entrance. Not electronically sealed. Actual physical chains. The Arizona sun reflected sharply off metal links while heat shimmered above the pavement hard enough to blur the distant clubhouse behind them. A printed notice hung beside the keypad. Access restricted pending HOA board review. Residents stood nearby whispering while security guards pretended not to stare at me. One older man walking his dog finally muttered what everyone else was thinking. Can they even do that? Good question. I walked directly to the security booth where a younger guard sat sweating through his gray uniform shirt. The poor guy looked terrified before I even opened my mouth. "Deborah told us nobody enters without board approval," he explained quickly. "Especially commercial parcel holders." Commercial parcel holders. Interesting phrase. "So she does understand the transfer happened," I said quietly. The guard looked away immediately. That answer told me everything. Deborah already knew the ownership structure beneath Lake Avalon was vulnerable. She was not denying it anymore. She was trying to contain it before residents fully understood what happened. I pulled out my phone and called the county property office directly while standing beside the locked gate under 108-degree heat. Sweat rolled down my neck while boat masts clinked softly in the marina behind the fence. 10 minutes later, a county access supervisor confirmed exactly what I suspected. The gate corridor technically crossed shared commercial easement property tied to the parcel acquisition under my name, meaning Deborah had no legal authority to physically restrict access without formal review. I thanked the supervisor and hung up slowly while residents nearby openly listened now. Then another voice cut through the heat behind me. "You really enjoy causing scenes, do you not?" Deborah. She stood beside the clubhouse entrance wearing another perfectly pressed white outfit despite the brutal temperature. Sunglasses. Clipboard. That same controlled smile stretched across her face while two board members hovered nervously behind her. I turned toward the locked marina gate between us. "You chained off shared easement access," I said evenly. "That is not going to end well legally." Deborah crossed her arms calmly. "The board voted to protect community assets from interference." I glanced toward the residents gathering around the entrance now. Curious faces. Nervous whispers. The atmosphere felt heavier than before. Less supportive. People were starting to notice contradictions inside Deborah's explanations. "Interesting," I replied. "Because county records classify me as the commercial landlord tied to those assets." Silence spread fast after that. One woman near the sidewalk actually pulled out her phone and started searching property records right there beside the gate. Deborah saw it happen too, and for the first time since moving to Lake Avalon, I watched genuine panic flash across her face before she buried it behind another polished suburban smile. Deborah called the emergency HOA meeting 2 nights later, and judging by the flood of golf carts lining the clubhouse entrance, half the neighborhood showed up expecting a public execution. The Arizona sky still glowed orange from sunset when I parked beside the marina and stepped out into dry evening heat, carrying a folder full of county records under my arm. The smell of lake water mixed with grilled food drifting from the clubhouse patio, where staff hurriedly cleared tables before the meeting started. Residents clustered outside in expensive casual clothes, whispering nervously, while security guards hovered near the entrance pretending not to stare at me. Nobody smiled anymore. The mood around Lake Avalon Estates had changed completely since the Marina Gate incident. People sensed something underneath the surface now, something bigger than HOA rules and landscaping complaints. As I walked toward the clubhouse, conversation slowed one table at a time until the whole patio went quiet except for ceiling fans humming overhead and ice clinking inside cocktail glasses. Deborah stood near the main entrance beside two board members wearing another flawless cream blazer despite the evening heat. She looked polished as always, but the energy around her felt different. Sharper, tighter, like somebody forcing calm through clenched teeth. "This is a private residence meeting," she announced immediately before I even reached the doors, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. There it was. Public humiliation again. Deborah loved performing authority in front of crowds because embarrassment worked better than actual facts most of the time. I stopped near the entrance while warm wind pushed across the lake behind the clubhouse. "Interesting," I replied calmly. "Considering this building operates on commercial parcel rights currently registered under my ownership structure." Several residents exchanged nervous looks immediately. Deborah ignored them. "You are not part of this association," she snapped. "And your ongoing interference has created unnecessary instability throughout the community." Instability. Same word again. Deborah treated reality like a public relations problem instead of a legal one. One of the board members standing beside her shifted awkwardly, holding a stack of printed papers against his chest. I recognized the expression instantly. Fear disguised as professionalism. "Actually," I said evenly, "county easement law gives me standing regarding marina and clubhouse commercial operations." Deborah folded her arms slowly. "You bought an abandoned cabin and now suddenly think you own the neighborhood." A few people laughed nervously behind her, but not many. The confidence inside Lake Avalon Estates was cracking fast. Before I could answer, another voice cut across the patio from near the parking lot. "Excuse me." Everyone turned at once. A woman wearing county administration credentials walked toward the clubhouse carrying a thick file box under one arm. Mid-40s. Tired expression. No interest in HOA drama whatsoever. Two deputies followed several steps behind her, looking equally exhausted by suburban politics. Deborah's posture changed instantly. "Can I help you?" she asked tightly. The county clerk barely looked at her. "I am here regarding updated ownership disclosures connected to Avalon Marina commercial parcel reassignment." Silence rolled across the patio like heat off pavement. Even the lake seemed quiet for a second beneath the sound of distant boat motors drifting through the dark. The clerk walked directly toward me instead and handed over a stamped packet thick enough to bend slightly under its own. "Wait, Mr. Bennett," she said professionally. "These are the finalized county confirmations tied to the acquisition transfer." I took the packet while residents nearby openly leaned closer trying to read the documents. Deborah stepped forward immediately. "This is inappropriate," she said sharply. "You cannot conduct county business during a private HOA meeting." The clerk finally looked at her fully for the first time. "Ma'am, the county became involved the moment shared commercial easement disputes affected marina operations and restricted public access routes." That sentence hit harder than Deborah expected. You could feel the atmosphere shift around the patio instantly. Residents started whispering openly now. Public access routes. Shared commercial easements. Those were not phrases associated with normal HOA disagreements. Deborah glanced around, realizing control was slipping away in real time. "This entire situation stems from misleading paperwork interpretations," she insisted. "The association has maintained operational authority over these facilities for decades." The county clerk opened her file box calmly and removed several older land maps covered in official stamps and signatures. "Operational authority does not equal ownership," she replied flatly. "According to county transfer records finalized last week, Mr. Bennett now holds commercial landlord rights connected to the marina fuel station, clubhouse parking corridor, gate access easements, and several surrounding service structures." The silence afterward felt physical. One older resident near the patio rail actually sat down slowly, like his knees stopped working correctly. Another woman stared directly at Deborah and asked the question everyone had been thinking for days. "Wait, the HOA does not actually own the marina." Deborah opened her mouth immediately, but no answer came out. That was the moment the illusion finally cracked. Not because of lawsuits, not because of threats, because residents saw uncertainty on Deborah Sinclair's face for the first time in years. Real uncertainty. The kind no polished speech could hide anymore. People started talking all at once after that. Questions flying across the patio faster than Deborah could control. Who approved the commercial leases? Why were ownership records never disclosed? Did HOA fees pay for property the association did not legally own? I stood quietly near the entrance while the clubhouse descended into complete confusion around us. The smell of lake water drifted through warm desert air while palm trees rustled softly beside the marina lights glowing across the shoreline. Deborah tried regaining control several times, but it was over. Once people realize fake authority depends entirely on confidence, they stop fearing it almost immediately. Then the county clerk said something that changed the entire night completely. "There is also an unresolved issue regarding vendor revenue disclosures tied to marina commercial operations." Every board member beside Deborah went pale at the exact same time. And right then, standing under the clubhouse lights while nervous residents whispered around us, I finally understood what Deborah Sinclair had really been protecting all along. The meeting exploded after the county clerk mentioned vendor revenue disclosures. Residents stopped acting like polite suburban neighbors and started sounding like investors realizing somebody had been hiding numbers from them for years. Questions hit Deborah from every direction while ceiling fans pushed warm air through the crowded clubhouse patio. The smell of lake water, expensive perfume, and spilled wine mixed together under the Arizona night, while board members whispered frantically beside stacks of paperwork spread across folding tables. Deborah kept trying to regain control by repeating the same phrases over and over. Administrative misunderstanding, temporary review process, technical restructuring. But the words sounded weaker each time she said them, because people were finally paying attention to the details instead of the confidence behind them. I stayed near the back of the patio while residents argued around the county clerk demanding answers about marina ownership and commercial leases. That was when I noticed one board member quietly slipping out through the side hallway carrying a banker box full of files. against his chest. Thin guy. Gray polo shirt soaked through with sweat despite the air conditioning. He moved too fast for somebody leaving casually. My instincts from years managing commercial contracts kicked in immediately. I followed him outside through the side exit leading toward the marina storage offices. Warm desert wind hit hard after the chilled clubhouse air, while dock lights reflected across dark water behind the buildings. The guy nearly dropped the box when he saw me standing near the walkway. "Relax," I said calmly. "I am not here to stop you." He stared at me for a second before letting out a nervous breath. "You really did not know about any of this before buying the parcel?" he asked quietly. I shook my head once. The guy laughed softly without humor. "Then you accidentally stepped into a hornet nest." His name was Gary, treasurer for the HOA board during the past 4 years. He looked exhausted in the way people look after carrying secrets too long. Sweat rolled down his forehead, while distant voices from the clubhouse echoed across the marina parking lot behind us. "Deborah has been moving commercial money through the HOA structure for years," he admitted quietly. "Marina vendor contracts, event rentals, gate access fees, outside maintenance companies. Most residents think dues pay for everything, but the real money comes from commercial operations." I leaned against the railing beside the dock while warm lake air carried the smell of boat fuel and algae drifting off the water. "And the ownership issue?" I asked. Gary glanced back toward the clubhouse nervously before answering. She always knew the marina parcels operated separately from the residential lots, but she assumed nobody would ever buy the old cabin property because the estate stayed tied up for years after the original owner died. There it was, the truth finally sliding into place piece by piece. Deborah never expected the parcel transfer to happen at all. She built her entire authority structure around abandoned ownership gaps and residents too distracted to read land records. "What is inside the box?" I asked. Gary looked down at the files silently for a moment before speaking again. "Vendor agreements, revenue reports, lease renewals, some signed under shell maintenance companies connected to Deborah's relatives." The wind shifted across the marina, carrying faint music from a distant boat party somewhere on the lake. Everything around us suddenly felt strangely quiet compared to the chaos still boiling inside the clubhouse. "Why show me now?" I asked. Gary laughed bitterly. "Because the county clerk mentioning disclosure reviews means this whole thing is already collapsing." He handed me a thick folder from the box. The first page alone made my stomach tighten immediately. Marina event revenue, fuel dock vendor percentages, parking income tied to holiday lake festivals. The numbers were enormous, far beyond normal HOA operations. Deborah was not just running a neighborhood association. She built a hidden commercial business network underneath the community while presenting it publicly as resident services. Every restaurant vendor, every marina contractor, every event permit flowed through overlapping agreements connected to property she never actually owned. I flipped another page and froze. Landlord authorization signature required. Current signature block left intentionally blank for the past 6 years. She never had legal authority finalized? I asked quietly. Gary shook his head. Operational control, yes. Legal ownership? Not exactly. That explained the panic. Deborah spent years acting like ownership itself, while hoping nobody would ever challenge the paperwork underneath. Then I bought the one parcel tying the whole commercial structure together. Back inside the clubhouse, things sounded worse now. Raised voices. Residents demanding board resignations. Somebody shouting about hidden vendor profits. Gary looked toward the noise nervously. Once the residents realized the marina businesses generated private revenue outside disclosed HOA accounting, Deborah is finished. I stared across the dark water while dock lights shimmered against slow ripples moving through the marina. The smell of fuel and warm lake air reminded me strangely of old construction nights finishing commercial waterfront projects years earlier. Long hours, temporary authority, everybody pretending systems last forever. But nothing lasts once contracts stop protecting the people hiding behind them. You should keep those copies somewhere safe, Gary said quietly before nodding toward the folder in my hands. Then he walked away toward the parking lot carrying the rest of the files like a man finally unloading weight from his shoulders. I remained near the marina alone for another few minutes listening to distant arguments spill out from the clubhouse. Deborah Sinclair built her entire identity around controlling Lake Avalon estates. The gates, the rules, the meetings, the social pressure, the illusion of ownership. But standing there beneath warm Arizona night air with the real financial records in my hands, I realized something important. Deborah was never actually powerful. She was just the only person who knew where the paperwork was buried. And now I knew too. The morning after the emergency meeting, Lake Avalon Estates felt like a luxury resort trying to hide smoke coming from the walls. Nobody said the word scandal out loud yet, but you could feel it moving through the neighborhood like heat rising off pavement. Golf carts gathered in small groups outside the clubhouse while residents stood around holding printed emails and screenshots from county property records. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through open patio doors where people whispered in tense voices instead of discussing golf scores and lakefront property values. Deborah Sinclair's perfect suburban machine was starting to rattle apart one nervous conversation at a time. I spent most of that morning sitting at the cabin kitchen table reviewing the financial folders Gary gave me while ceiling fans pushed warm air through the old cedar rooms. The cabin smelled like lake water, dust, and black coffee brewing too long on the stove. Every page I opened revealed another layer underneath the HOA. Vendor kickbacks hidden inside landscaping contracts. Event revenue rerouted through maintenance subsidiaries. Marina fuel commissions tied to companies registered under relatives connected to Deborah. The entire system operated like somebody built a private business empire underneath a gated retirement community and assumed nobody would ever follow the paperwork closely enough to notice. Around 11 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time the number belonged to a law office in Scottsdale. Mr. Bennett, a calm woman's voice said, "My clients would like to discuss temporary operational continuity regarding the marina and clubhouse facilities." Operational continuity. Fancy legal language for panic. I looked out through the kitchen window, toward the marina shimmering beneath brutal Arizona sunlight. Your clients being the HOA board or Deborah Sinclair personally? Silence lasted maybe 2 seconds too long. Both parties are interested in cooperative solutions, she finally answered. There it was. Deborah had shifted strategies completely now. No more calling deputies. No more pretending I was trespassing. The moment residents started questioning financial records, she moved directly into damage control mode. Send proposals in writing. I replied calmly before hanging up. Then I drove into town. Not to confront anyone. Not to threaten lawsuits. Just to prepare quietly. Years working commercial construction taught me something important. Real leverage rarely comes from yelling. It comes from understanding infrastructure better than the people pretending to control it. I spent the afternoon at county offices pulling every commercial easement and marina vendor agreement tied to Lake Avalon Estates. The deeper I dug, the worse the numbers looked. Fuel dock revenue alone generated hundreds of thousands annually. Seasonal boat festivals brought in outside vendor payments through parking leases and temporary permits. Even the clubhouse restaurant sat on overlapping commercial parcel agreements routed through the marina ownership structure. Deborah did not just build an HOA empire. She built a business district wearing an HOA costume. By late afternoon, I met with an accountant named Martin Hale, recommended by a former contractor friend in Phoenix. Gray hair, sunburned neck, quiet guy who smelled faintly like printer toner and cigarette smoke. We spread the financial documents across his office conference table. While old air conditioning units rattled overhead, Martin reviewed the numbers for nearly an hour without speaking much. Then he leaned back slowly and rubbed both hands across his face. "Lucas," he said carefully, "if even half these vendor flows bypass disclosed association accounting, the board has exposure problems bigger than HOA disputes." Exposure problems. Another clean professional phrase hiding something ugly underneath. How ugly? I asked. Martin tapped one revenue sheet quietly. The marina and event structures appear to operate like commercial leased property without fully separated accounting disclosures. He looked directly at me then. "And now you technically control the underlying commercial parcel rights." That sentence settled into the room heavily while traffic hummed outside the office windows. Because suddenly this was not just about Deborah Sinclair anymore. Banks, vendors, insurance companies, contractors, they all depended on ownership structures remaining stable. And right now the legal foundation underneath Lake Avalon Estates was shifting fast. That evening I returned to the marina just before sunset. Warm orange light reflected across the water while palm trees cast long shadows over the docks. Residents sat quietly outside their condos watching the lake in strange silence. Nobody waved at Deborah's security patrols anymore. People were thinking now, questioning. A maintenance worker near the fuel station lowered his voice when I walked past. "They are holding another closed board meeting tonight," he muttered. "Everybody is scared." I believed him. You could feel fear in the atmosphere now. Not dramatic panic. Financial fear. Reputation fear. The kind wealthy communities hate most because it spreads faster than gossip once money becomes uncertain. As I reached the marina office, I noticed fresh paper taped across the entrance door. Temporary management review in progress. Another sign of collapse disguised as administration. Inside the office, 2 employees hurriedly boxed files while speaking in nervous whispers. One woman looked up when I entered and immediately froze. "Are we losing our jobs?" she asked quietly before I could even say anything. That question hit harder than I expected. Because unlike Deborah, most of these people were just workers trying to pay bills inside a system they never fully understood. I shook my head slowly. Not if things get handled correctly. The woman visibly relaxed after hearing that. Then she handed me a stack of marina vendor contracts sitting beside the desk. "These arrived for landlord approval signatures this afternoon," she explained nervously. Landlord approval signatures. Hearing those words inside Deborah Sinclair's marina office felt surreal. I flipped through the contracts slowly while evening wind carried the smell of gasoline and lake water through the open doorway. Every single agreement now required authorization from the actual commercial parcel owner. Me. That was when I finally understood something Deborah probably realized days earlier. She never truly controlled Lake Avalon Estates. She only controlled people who believed she did. The power shift happened quietly at first. No dramatic announcement. No screaming matches in the clubhouse. Just paperwork moving through the system one signature at a time, while Lake Avalon Estates slowly realized the ground underneath its luxury image had changed owners. 3 days after the emergency meeting, every marina vendor, fuel supplier, gate maintenance contractor, and event coordinator received updated authorization notices requiring commercial landlord verification before future operations could continue. My name sat on every document. Lucas Bennett, commercial parcel holder. The first call started before sunrise. I woke to my phone vibrating nonstop on the cabin nightstand while pale desert light spilled through the windows and warm air drifted in carrying the smell of lake water and creosote trees after an overnight rain. Marina contractors asking where to submit invoices now. Security companies requesting updated access agreements. Event planners trying to confirm whether weekend reservations would still happen. The strangest part was how polite everyone suddenly became once they realized the ownership transfer was real. Funny how quickly authority changes tone when money depends on cooperation instead of intimidation. By 8 o'clock, the entire marina parking lot looked tense. Vendor trucks lined the entrance while HOA employees carried boxes between the clubhouse and administration office, like people evacuating before a storm. The decorative fountains still sprayed beside the lake. The palm trees still swayed over polished walkways. But the illusion underneath everything felt cracked now. Residents watched from balconies while whispers followed every golf cart crossing the property. Nobody trusted Deborah Sinclair's explanations anymore. I spent most of that morning inside the marina office reviewing operational contracts with Martin Hale while ceiling vents rattled overhead. The office smelled like printer toner, stale coffee, and fuel drifting from the docks outside. Martin spread spreadsheets across the desk while tapping figures with a pen. "These numbers are worse than I thought," he muttered quietly. The association structured multiple commercial revenue streams through temporary vendor subsidiaries instead of transparent operational accounting. I leaned back in the chair staring through the office window toward the fuel dock shimmering under brutal Arizona sunlight. Meaning, Martin slid one report across the desk. Meaning Deborah treated marina businesses like private leverage while residents believed HOA dues funded everything. There it was again. The same pattern hiding underneath every fake authority system. Control the information, and people stop questioning ownership. Around noon, another county vehicle pulled into the marina entrance. This time residents openly gathered nearby watching. No more pretending nothing was happening. Deborah emerged from the clubhouse seconds later wearing a perfectly tailored navy blazer despite 104-degree heat. But she looked different now, tired around the eyes, less polished, like somebody spending too many nights trying to hold collapsing walls together with confidence alone. She spotted me through the marina office windows and immediately walked across the parking lot toward the entrance. Residents quietly followed behind at a distance, pretending to check mailboxes or walk dogs while clearly listening. Deborah stopped just outside the office doorway while warm wind pushed across the docks behind her, carrying the smell of gasoline and hot pavement. "We need to discuss operational stability," she said sharply. "Not hello, not good afternoon. Straight to survival mode." Martin quietly gathered his papers and stepped aside without speaking. Deborah waited until he left before lowering her voice. "You are creating panic throughout the community." I stared at her for a second because the irony almost felt insulting. This was the same woman who called deputies on me over property she never legally controlled. The same woman who weaponized HOA violations to intimidate residents for years. Now suddenly she cared about stability. "The community is panicking because they realize the truth," I answered calmly. "Not because I enforced ownership rights." Deborah crossed her arms tightly. "The board is willing to negotiate revised operational oversight if you stop escalating this publicly." Revised operational oversight. Another polished phrase hiding desperation underneath. "You mean you want continued access to commercial property your association never actually owned?" I replied. Her jaw tightened instantly. Behind her, several residents stood near the marina rail pretending not to watch us. One older couple openly held printed county documents in their hands now. Deborah noticed too. She lowered her voice further. "You could make a great deal of money here if you stop turning residents against the board." That sentence told me everything. Deborah still thought this was about ego and leverage. She could not understand that some people value honesty more than easy profit. I looked out toward the lake where boats drifted slowly across bright water beneath cloudless desert sky. "You spent years convincing people this place belonged to the HOA," I said quietly. "Meanwhile, you built private commercial operations underneath them." Deborah glanced away for the first time since I met her. Tiny movement, but important. "The community needed structure," she muttered. "No," I answered. "You needed control." Silence settled between us while dock chains clinked softly against metal posts outside. Then another interruption arrived. One of the marina employees hurried toward the office holding a stack of overnight delivery envelopes. "These came for landlord review," he explained nervously while handing them directly to me instead of Deborah. I opened the top envelope slowly. Updated service agreements from the private security company operating Lake Avalon's entrance gates. The contract requested authorization signatures from the commercial parcel owner before continuing services next month. I looked up at Deborah carefully. "Interesting timing," I said. Her face went pale for half a second before recovering, because she understood exactly what those papers meant. Even the security gates she used to control the neighborhood now depended on landlord authorization tied to my property rights. The same gates she once tried using to lock me out. Residents nearby started whispering louder after noticing the security company paperwork in my hands. You could actually watch the realization spreading across their faces now. Deborah Sinclair never truly owned Lake Avalon Estates. She only controlled systems connected to land somebody else finally purchased. And for the first time since this whole thing started, the residents were no longer afraid of her. They were afraid of what else she had been hiding. The final collapse of Deborah Sinclair's little kingdom happened on a Tuesday morning under cloudless Arizona skies, while the entire neighborhood watched from balconies, golf carts, and marina walkways pretending they were not waiting for it. By then, the county financial review had expanded beyond simple property disputes. Vendor contracts were frozen pending investigation. Security companies demanded updated authorization signatures. Insurance carriers requested emergency clarification regarding commercial ownership liability. The whole structure Deborah spent years building started turning against her, one legal document at a time. I was standing on my dock sanding loose cedar boards when the first moving truck rolled into the clubhouse parking lot just after sunrise. The smell of fresh cut wood mixed with lake water and desert heat, while cicadas buzzed loudly through the palm trees near the marina. Across the water, I could see board members carrying banker boxes out of the administration office under the nervous supervision of two county auditors. No more polished confidence. No more luxury image. Just paperwork, stress, and people trying to protect themselves before the system finished collapsing around them. Residents gathered everywhere now. Along the marina railings. Outside the cafe patio. Beside the fountain Deborah used to pose near during HOA social events. Nobody even pretended loyalty anymore. Once people stop fearing authority, they start remembering every humiliation they stayed quiet about. Every unfair fine. Every selective rule. Every moment Deborah weaponized embarrassment to maintain control over the community. Around 9 o'clock my phone buzzed with another email from the HOA board. Emergency restructuring proposal. Temporary operational transition agreement. Revised community oversight recommendations. Same polished language. Different level of desperation. I ignored it and kept sanding the dock while warm wind pushed small ripples across the lake. Truthfully, I never wanted to destroy Lake Avalon Estates. Most residents were decent people who simply bought homes inside a system they trusted. Deborah was the one who turned it into a private empire built on hidden contracts and borrowed authority. By late morning, another crowd formed outside the clubhouse. This time louder. More emotional. Somebody shouted from the patio. Then applause broke out across the marina. I set the sander down and walked toward the noise slowly while heat rose off the pavement hard enough to blur the distant mountains beyond the lake. The clubhouse doors stood open when I arrived. Residents packed the lobby shoulder to shoulder beneath cold air conditioning and the smell of expensive candles Deborah always insisted on burning during board meetings. But Deborah herself stood near the center of the room, looking nothing like the suburban queen who once called deputies on me beside the marina gate. Her blazer wrinkled, makeup uneven, hands gripping a folder tightly against her chest while several board members avoided eye contact entirely. One older resident named Harold Whitaker stepped forward, holding a printed petition in his hand. "We voted," he announced loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "The board is removing Deborah Sinclair effective immediately, pending financial review completion." Silence hit first, then more applause. Not cruel applause. Relieved applause. The kind people release after carrying tension too long. Deborah looked around the room slowly like she genuinely could not believe the same residents who feared her weeks earlier were no longer backing down. "You people have no idea what it took to maintain this community," she snapped suddenly. There she was again. The real Deborah underneath all the polished speeches. Not concerned about residents. Concerned about losing control. Harold did not even flinch. "What you maintained was a business scheme hidden behind HOA fees." Several people nodded immediately after hearing that. Deborah's face tightened hard enough to show actual anger now. She looked directly at me standing near the marina entrance. "This is exactly what he wanted," she said sharply. "Chaos." I stared back calmly while cool clubhouse air drifted through the crowded room, carrying the smell of coffee and lake water from the open patio outside. "No," I answered quietly. "I wanted honesty." The room went silent again after that because everybody knew it was true. I never threatened residents. Never blocked access gates. Never called deputies. Deborah did all of that herself while trying to protect ownership she never legally had. 2 county auditors approached her moments later requesting additional financial records tied to marina vendor subsidiaries. Deborah looked exhausted suddenly. Smaller somehow. Like all the authority disappeared once people stopped pretending it existed. She handed over the folder without another argument. The rest happened quickly after that. The board approved temporary restructuring under transparent commercial lease oversight connected to the marina parcel agreements. Hidden vendor contracts were dissolved. Several unnecessary HOA fees disappeared within weeks once. Residents finally saw how much commercial revenue had been flowing outside disclosed budgets. The security company renewed operations under direct landlord authorization through my office instead of Deborah's private management structure. Even the marina employees looked less stressed afterward. Funny what honesty does to a place. About a month later, I was back on the dock one quiet morning repairing fishing rod holders while the sun rose over Lake Avalon, turning the water gold beneath cool desert air. No security patrols hovering nearby. No violation notices taped to my mailbox. Just the sound of small waves hitting the dock and birds skimming low across the lake. Some residents actually waved now when passing the cabin road. A few even stopped bringing homemade food or asking fishing questions like normal neighbors instead of scared HOA members. The community felt different without Deborah's constant pressure hanging over everything. More real, less staged. I remember sitting there that morning smelling fresh cedar and lake water while sunlight moved slowly across the marina behind me. Then I looked toward the same gate where deputies once stood trying to remove me from property connected to my own ownership rights. Funny thing about fake authority. It usually survives right up until somebody reads the paperwork carefully enough. And once that happens, the whole performance collapses faster than anyone expects.